If the dogs start reacting before the alarms, it means we're already late. At 3:14 a.m., deep inside a decommissioned operations facility outside the city limits, an unexpected structural disturbance echoed through the lower command sector, triggering silent protocols that had not been activated in years. Captain Ethan Miller was the first to see the alert, a sealed transmission marked with a black designation that carried no briefing, no context, only coordinates and a single instruction to mobilize the Iron Dog Division. Within minutes, Sergeant Jason Cole arrived at the kennel bay, where a German shepherd named Rex stood alert, calm but observant, as if he understood the gravity of the moment without a single word being spoken. Dr. Ryan Parker reviewed Rex's behavioral logs, noting a pattern of heightened awareness that did not match any known training cycle. The team assembled without ceremony, loading standard field equipment and preparing for deployment into an unknown situation defined only by its silence. The transport vehicle left the facility before sunrise, moving along empty highways toward a restricted perimeter that had been inactive on official maps for over a decade. As they approached the coordinates, communication channels began to degrade, leaving only intermittent fragments of a distress signal that repeated without clear origin or sender identification. Rex shifted his focus toward the horizon, tracking something that no instrument had yet registered, his attention fixed on details hidden within the environment. Jason monitored him closely, recognizing the subtle behavioral cues that indicated a developing response pattern tied to environmental irregularities rather than command signals. Dr. Parker observed the same data emerging in real time, noting that whatever lay ahead was influencing both human systems and trained animal perception in ways that were not yet understood. The vehicle crossed into the restricted zone just as the last stable signal faded completely, leaving the team in a condition of full isolation. Inside the quiet that followed, Rex advanced slightly ahead of the formation, pausing at intervals as if confirming invisible markers along the path. The environment showed no immediate signs of disturbance, yet every indicator suggested that the normal structure of the site had been altered in subtle but significant ways. Jason tightened his grip on the tactical interface, preparing for contingencies that had not been fully defined in the mission brief. Ethan reviewed the last remaining data fragment, realizing that the operation was no longer about recovery or inspection, but about understanding a system that was still actively responding to their presence. As they reached the final approach point, Rex stopped completely, staring into the distance where the terrain disappeared into shadow, signaling that whatever was waiting ahead had already become aware of them. With every second of silence stretching longer than expected, the team advanced awareness protocols, relying on environmental mapping tools and Rex's instinctive guidance, while Ethan understood that the mission had shifted into a deeper unknown where observation, timing, and restraint would define whether they could safely complete their objective successfully. The moment the transport crossed deeper into the restricted zone, the remaining communication link with command control degraded into unstable fragments, forcing the team to rely entirely on onboard systems and direct observation. Captain Ethan Miller initiated a full transition to offline navigation protocols, confirming coordinates against a physical map overlay, while the vehicle continued along a narrow service road bordered by overgrown vegetation and abandoned infrastructure. The air around them felt increasingly static, not in a physical sense of resistance, but in the absence of expected environmental activity, as if the area had been removed from normal operational cycles for an extended period. Sergeant Jason Cole maintained visual focus on Rex, who now moved with measured precision inside the rear compartment, occasionally lifting his head toward specific directions that did not align with any visible landmarks. Dr. Ryan Parker monitored internal diagnostic data, noting subtle changes in Rex's heart rate variability and attention response patterns, which suggested heightened environmental processing rather than stress or agitation. At approximately 4:02 a.m., the vehicle passed a collapsed checkpoint structure marked only by faded signage and inactive surveillance equipment, confirming that the team had entered a sector that had been officially decommissioned for reasons not included in their briefing. Ethan requested a status confirmation from Central Command, but the communication system returned only a neutral carrier signal without content, indicating a complete loss of two-way transmission. Jason observed that Rex had shifted position again, now standing directly facing the forward exit, remaining perfectly still as if anticipating arrival at a specific threshold point. The road narrowed further, transitioning into cracked concrete lined with outdated facility markers that suggested the presence of a larger operational complex ahead, though no active power signatures were detected by standard scanning equipment. Dr. Parker cross-referenced historical facility records on a handheld terminal, identifying partial references to a former research and logistics site that had been permanently sealed after a classified incident review, though no operational details were accessible. Ethan acknowledged the information silently, choosing not to interrupt the forward movement of the vehicle, as stopping would provide no additional clarity in the absence of external guidance. Rex then produced a low alert posture, not indicating distress, but a heightened state of environmental awareness, focusing on a fixed point beyond the visible terrain where the road appeared to descend slightly into a lower basin. As the vehicle approached that area, onboard sensors recorded minimal magnetic fluctuation and inconsistent temperature readings that did not match surrounding environmental conditions within a standard radius of measurement. Jason tightened his focus on Rex, recognizing that the animal's attention was now fully synchronized with the direction of travel, suggesting that whatever lay ahead was not random, but structured in a way that could be interpreted through instinctive pattern recognition. Ethan instructed a reduction in speed to maintain controlled approach, emphasizing procedural caution as they neared the final coordinates. The vehicle continued forward at a slower pace, and the surrounding silence became more pronounced, not through absence of sound, but through the absence of expected environmental signals such as wildlife activity or mechanical background noise. At the edge of the next visibility range, Rex leaned slightly forward, maintaining a steady gaze that indicated a definitive point of interest directly ahead. The team remained in controlled approach mode as they prepared to reach the next operational boundary, fully aware that the situation was transitioning from reconnaissance into active assessment of an unknown and unverified environment. As the vehicle continued its slow advance toward the final coordinate point, the terrain ahead began to shift in subtle but measurable ways, with elevation dropping by approximately 12 feet over a short distance and structural remnants becoming more frequent along the roadside. Captain Ethan Miller maintained steady control of the navigation system while confirming that all external communications remained fully inactive, leaving the unit completely isolated from command infrastructure. Sergeant Jason Cole kept his attention fixed on Rex, who now stood in a fully alert posture, facing forward with unwavering focus that suggested a precise point of interest beyond the visible boundary of the road. Dr. Ryan Parker recorded continuous environmental readings, noting that electromagnetic stability had decreased further, although still within non-hazardous operational limits, which indicated that the area was not naturally unstable but potentially influenced by external interference patterns. At 4:17 a.m., the vehicle crossed a secondary boundary marker consisting of a partially collapsed concrete archway, which did not appear on any current operational map and showed signs of long-term abandonment rather than recent structural failure. Ethan slowed the vehicle further, bringing it to a controlled crawl as the forward visibility range extended into a wider open zone surrounded by low-lying structures that resembled support facilities or auxiliary buildings. Rex shifted his stance slightly, but did not break focus, instead tracking movement across a distant section of terrain that remained visually unremarkable to human observation but registered as significant in his behavioral response profile. Jason noted that Rex was no longer reacting to general environmental noise, but was instead isolating a specific directional vector, indicating a target or stimulus that required closer investigation. Dr. Parker cross-referenced archived facility layouts on a secure offline terminal and identified partial architectural matches to a former logistics coordination site, although the internal structure data remained incomplete due to missing classification records. Ethan acknowledged the correlation without comment and instructed the team to prepare for potential disembarkation once the vehicle reached the next stable observation point. As the vehicle advanced another 200 yards, onboard sensors detected a minor fluctuation in atmospheric composition, primarily related to humidity levels and trace particulate density, suggesting limited environmental circulation within the area. Rex then adjusted his posture again, lowering his head slightly while maintaining forward orientation, a behavior that typically indicated concentrated assessment rather than reaction to immediate threat conditions. Jason placed a hand near the interior support frame, readying himself for controlled exit procedures, while maintaining visual contact with Rex to ensure synchronized movement if deployment became necessary. The vehicle gradually approached a widened section of road that opened into a central access corridor leading deeper into the facility perimeter, where structural outlines became more defined but still lacked active illumination or visible operational activity. Ethan brought the vehicle to a near stop at the edge of this corridor, confirming positional accuracy against the final coordinate marker transmitted in the original directive. For several seconds, no one spoke, as the absence of external signals created a focused operational silence that required full reliance on visual and analytical input. Rex remained completely still, directing his attention forward with absolute consistency, signaling that the point of interest was now within immediate proximity. Ethan initiated a final systems check, verifying equipment readiness and confirming that all personnel were prepared for controlled entry into the next phase of assessment. The vehicle remained positioned at the threshold of the corridor, marking the transition from external approach to internal investigation of an area that had not been accessed or documented for an extended period, while the team prepared to proceed under conditions of full environmental uncertainty. The vehicle remained stationary at the entrance of the central access corridor, while Captain Ethan Miller completed a final verification of all onboard systems, confirming that navigation, environmental monitoring, and internal communications were functioning independently of external support networks. The corridor ahead extended approximately 300 feet before splitting into two lateral pathways, each leading deeper into structures that were partially obscured by distance and low ambient light conditions. Sergeant Jason Cole initiated a controlled readiness sequence, adjusting his position to allow for rapid deployment while maintaining constant visual alignment with Rex, who continued to focus forward with a level of precision that suggested active target identification rather than general environmental awareness. Dr. Ryan Parker reviewed the latest sensor output and noted a gradual stabilization in electromagnetic variance, indicating that the immediate entry zone was more controlled than the outer perimeter, though still inconsistent with standard operational facility behavior. At 4:31 a.m., Ethan issued a directive for a phased exit procedure, beginning with environmental confirmation scans before any personnel movement beyond the vehicle threshold. Jason observed Rex shift his weight slightly forward, indicating readiness for movement without external prompting, a behavior consistent with high-confidence tracking response under trained operational conditions. As the side doors of the vehicle unlocked with a soft mechanical release, the interior lighting adjusted automatically to match external visibility levels, revealing the corridor surface as a worn composite material marked by faded directional indicators and inactive embedded guidance strips. Ethan deployed a portable scanning device that projected a limited-range environmental map, which confirmed structural continuity but showed irregular voids within internal sections of the facility ahead. Dr. Parker compared the scan results with archived data fragments and identified a partial match to a former logistical distribution hub, although critical sections of the blueprint remained inaccessible due to corrupted historical records. Jason maintained position at the exit point, ensuring that Rex remained within controlled proximity while preparing for coordinated movement into the corridor. Rex then stepped forward onto the exterior surface without hesitation, immediately orienting toward the right branch of the corridor split, suggesting a stronger environmental signal in that direction. Ethan noted the directional preference and logged it as a potential priority path for initial investigation, while maintaining standard protocol for balanced area assessment. The team advanced in a measured formation, with Jason and Rex leading at a controlled distance, followed by Ethan and Dr. Parker maintaining analytical oversight from the rear position. As they progressed deeper into the corridor, ambient sound levels decreased further, creating a highly controlled acoustic environment that allowed for precise detection of minor structural and mechanical variations within the surrounding area. Rex paused intermittently at specific points along the path, each pause lasting only a few seconds, as if confirming sequential markers embedded within the environment that were not visually identifiable to human observation. Jason recorded these behaviors for later analysis, recognizing a consistent pattern of directional confirmation that aligned with structured navigation logic rather than random exploration. Ethan observed that the corridor walls began to show increased structural reinforcement as they moved deeper, suggesting progression toward a central operational zone rather than peripheral storage areas. Dr. Parker detected a slight increase in internal temperature stability, indicating possible residual system activity or controlled environmental regulation deeper within the facility. At the next intersection point, Rex stopped again and oriented toward a descending access route marked by partially illuminated emergency strips that flickered intermittently without consistent power output. Ethan paused the team advance, initiating a full situational assessment to determine whether the lower route represented the primary objective path indicated in the original coordinates. The team stood at the intersection in controlled readiness, fully aware that the next movement would transition them from structural exploration into the core operational interior of a long inactive facility, now showing signs of partial systemic response. At the intersection, Captain Ethan Miller maintained a controlled pause while reviewing the environmental scan overlay projected from the handheld unit, confirming that the descending access route indicated by Rex aligned with a structurally reinforced subsystem leading below the primary corridor level. The flickering emergency strips along the downward path emitted inconsistent light pulses at irregular intervals, suggesting either degraded power distribution or partial system reactivation within isolated segments of the facility infrastructure. Sergeant Jason Cole adjusted his stance to maintain optimal balance for immediate movement, while ensuring that Rex remained within direct line of sight and close operational range. Dr. Ryan Parker analyzed the latest diagnostic feed and observed a minor but consistent increase in localized temperature stability near the descending route, which indicated a controlled environmental condition rather than natural degradation, reinforcing the possibility of an internally regulated subsystem still operating at minimal capacity. Ethan issued a directive for cautious descent, emphasizing single-file movement with continuous environmental monitoring and immediate reporting of any structural or sensor anomalies. Rex initiated movement first, stepping onto the downward incline without hesitation, his focus remaining locked on the deeper section of the facility where visibility diminished beyond the range of portable lighting. Jason followed closely, maintaining a measured distance while tracking both Rex's behavior and the structural integrity of the steps, which appeared to be constructed from reinforced composite material designed for heavy operational use. As the team descended approximately 40 feet, ambient acoustic feedback shifted noticeably, with external silence giving way to faint mechanical resonance patterns that were not continuous but cyclical in nature, suggesting intermittent system activity rather than full operational restart. Dr. Parker recorded these acoustic fluctuations and cross-referenced them with known facility design patterns, identifying potential matches to internal climate regulation systems or legacy data processing units. Ethan continued to monitor directional stability on the navigation interface, confirming that the descent path remained consistent with the primary coordinate target established in the original directive. Rex paused briefly at a midpoint landing platform, orienting toward a corridor branching left, though his primary focus quickly returned to the downward continuation, indicating that the stronger environmental signal remained below rather than laterally distributed. Jason noted this behavior and logged it as a dual path awareness response, suggesting that Rex was processing multiple environmental inputs simultaneously while prioritizing the strongest directional source. The team resumed descent in controlled sequence, with Ethan maintaining rear oversight and Dr. Parker positioned centrally to ensure continuous data capture from both upper and lower structural zones. As they moved deeper, the emergency lighting became slightly more stable, transitioning from irregular flicker to slow intermittent illumination, allowing partial visibility of wall-mounted conduits and outdated operational signage that suggested a former research logistics classification within the facility hierarchy. Ethan observed that the structural integrity of the stairwell increased the deeper they progressed, with reinforced anchoring points and reduced surface degradation, indicating that this section of the facility had been designed for long-term access rather than temporary use. Rex then slowed his pace, lowering his head slightly while maintaining forward orientation, signaling heightened concentration on an approaching threshold point within the lower level. Dr. Parker detected a subtle change in electromagnetic baseline readings, showing structured rather than chaotic variation, which implied organized system activity at a deeper core level. Jason tightened his grip on his equipment interface, preparing for potential transition into a more active operational environment. At the base of the descending route, a sealed access corridor came into view, marked by inactive biometric panels and dim emergency indicators that suggested restricted entry protocols still remained partially engaged. Ethan halted the team at the final step of the descent, initiating a full status assessment while Rex remained fixed on the sealed corridor ahead, indicating that the next phase of investigation would begin at a secured internal boundary that had not been accessed in a prolonged operational cycle. At the sealed access corridor at the base of the descent, Captain Ethan Miller initiated a full environmental verification cycle using portable diagnostic equipment, confirming that the biometric panel ahead remained inactive but structurally intact, with no signs of forced entry or external damage. The corridor itself extended forward approximately 150 feet before terminating at a secondary reinforced threshold marked with faded authorization indicators and a non-functional identification interface. Sergeant Jason Cole positioned himself slightly forward of the team formation while maintaining direct alignment with Rex, who remained fixed in a focused stance directed at the sealed threshold as if recognizing a specific point of significance beyond the physical barrier. Dr. Ryan Parker reviewed continuous sensor output and noted a stable but unusual electromagnetic signature localized around the sealed entry point, indicating that minimal system activity may still exist within internal subsystems despite the apparent shutdown state of the facility. Ethan cross-referenced the access panel design with archived structural schematics and confirmed that the interface matched a high-security classification system typically used for controlled research containment environments. At 4:52 a.m., the team conducted a proximity scan of the sealed door, revealing layered reinforcement materials and redundant locking mechanisms that suggested long-term isolation protocols rather than temporary closure. Jason observed Rex shift his head slightly toward the lower left section of the panel, indicating a consistent directional focus that did not change even as environmental variables were introduced. Dr. Parker recorded a minor fluctuation in internal temperature stability near the threshold, reinforcing the hypothesis that limited active regulation systems were still functioning within the sealed area. Ethan initiated a silent readiness check across all team members, confirming operational status before proceeding with any attempt to interact with the access system. The biometric interface displayed intermittent power reflections but failed to respond to standard activation protocols, indicating that authentication pathways were either disabled or rerouted through internal authorization systems. Rex then moved closer to the sealed door, stopping within 3 feet of the panel and maintaining a steady gaze at a specific point along the lower edge, suggesting detection of a non-visible stimulus or residual environmental trace. Jason carefully monitored this behavior while maintaining a controlled stance, ready to respond to any unexpected system reaction. Dr. Parker adjusted the scanning frequency to high-sensitivity mode and detected a faint structured signal pattern embedded within the surrounding infrastructure, consistent with low-level data transmission or dormant system heartbeat activity. Ethan acknowledged the finding and concluded that the facility was not fully inactive but operating in a restricted or partial state, requiring advanced access protocols not currently available to the team. The corridor lighting dimmed slightly before stabilizing again, indicating intermittent power redistribution within the internal grid. Rex remained completely still, signaling continued focus on the sealed threshold as the primary point of interest, while the team maintained full operational readiness at the boundary of an area that appeared to function under controlled internal conditions despite its long-term abandonment status. At the sealed threshold, Captain Ethan Miller maintained a controlled operational pause while initiating a layered diagnostic sweep of the access system, confirming that the biometric interface remained unresponsive despite intermittent low-level power fluctuations detected within the surrounding infrastructure. The sealed door in front of the team showed no physical compromise, but the embedded reinforcement structure indicated a multi-stage containment design, suggesting that the entry point was intentionally secured through redundant internal authorization layers rather than a single external lock mechanism. Sergeant Jason Cole held position slightly ahead of the formation while maintaining continuous visual alignment with Rex, who remained fixed in place directly facing the lower right section of the sealed panel, as if tracking a specific internal reference point that could not be observed through standard sensory input. Dr. Ryan Parker adjusted the environmental scanner to its highest sensitivity threshold and confirmed a faint but structured signal pattern emanating from within the sealed corridor beyond the door, indicating that a minimal operational system was still active at a controlled baseline level. At 5:03 a.m., Ethan attempted a secondary access verification procedure using encrypted command protocols stored within the portable interface, but the system returned no authentication response, reinforcing the conclusion that external command pathways had been fully isolated from internal facility control logic. Jason noted that Rex had shifted his stance only slightly, maintaining absolute focus without signs of distraction, which indicated sustained detection of a stable environmental cue rather than transient stimuli. Dr. Parker documented a gradual stabilization in electromagnetic variance near the door frame, suggesting that the internal system was maintaining regulated conditions rather than operating in random degradation mode. Ethan cross-referenced all available historical facility data fragments and confirmed that this type of reinforced containment structure was typically reserved for restricted operational zones requiring controlled access through internal authorization nodes. The corridor lighting overhead fluctuated once more, dimming briefly before returning to a steady low-intensity state, indicating that power distribution within this section was being actively managed by an internal subsystem rather than failing completely. Jason maintained a steady posture and prepared contingency response protocols in case of sudden structural or system activation, while ensuring Rex remained within controlled proximity for coordinated movement. Rex then leaned slightly forward without crossing the threshold, maintaining a precise, fixed gaze that suggested recognition of a consistent signal source beyond the sealed barrier. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern had not changed in frequency or intensity, indicating a stable operational loop or monitoring process still functioning behind the door. Ethan concluded that the sealed entry point was not merely a barrier, but a controlled interface between operational layers of the facility, requiring specific authorization conditions that were not currently available to the team. As the team held position at the boundary, the sealed corridor remained unchanged externally, yet all internal readings confirmed that the system beyond was active in a limited but structured state, suggesting that the next phase of investigation would require either system response initiation or alternative access strategy development. At the sealed corridor threshold, Captain Ethan Miller maintained full operational awareness while initiating a controlled reassessment of all environmental and structural data, confirming that the internal signal pattern detected beyond the door remained stable and consistent with a low-intensity but continuous system loop. The biometric interface showed no signs of external activation response, yet intermittent micro-fluctuations in power distribution along the frame suggested that the sealed entry point was still connected to an internal network that had not been fully deactivated. Sergeant Jason Cole held a steady forward position, ensuring that Rex remained within close visual and spatial proximity, while observing that the German Shepherd continued to focus on a precise point along the lower central seam of the reinforced door, indicating sustained detection of a non-visible but consistent environmental stimulus. Dr. Ryan Parker increased diagnostic sensitivity across all available channels and confirmed that the structured signal previously detected had not only remained stable but also exhibited minor rhythmic consistency, suggesting a regulated internal monitoring process rather than random residual energy. At 5:12 a.m., Ethan attempted a controlled proximity activation sequence using an encrypted manual override tool, but the system failed to initiate any authentication exchange, reinforcing the conclusion that access required internal authorization rather than external command input. Jason noted a slight adjustment in Rex's posture, with the animal shifting weight forward by a minimal degree while maintaining absolute visual focus, a behavioral pattern consistent with anticipation of system response rather than environmental reaction. Dr. Parker recorded a subtle increase in localized temperature consistency near the door frame, indicating that environmental regulation systems were compensating for external inactivity by maintaining controlled internal equilibrium. Ethan reviewed all available structural schematics once more and confirmed that the sealed corridor functioned as a transitional interface between two operational layers, designed to restrict access unless specific internal conditions were met, which were currently unknown to the team. The corridor lighting briefly dimmed again before stabilizing at a uniform low-intensity level, suggesting that internal power routing was actively adjusting in response to proximity detection or environmental presence. Jason maintained a steady readiness posture, ensuring that any sudden system response would be met with immediate controlled reaction, while continuing to monitor Rex for any change in behavioral pattern. Rex remained completely still for several seconds, then slightly lowered his head while maintaining fixed alignment with the door seam, reinforcing the interpretation that the strongest signal source was located directly behind the sealed barrier. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern exhibited no degradation or disruption, indicating a sustained operational cycle that had likely been running independently for an extended duration. Ethan concluded that the sealed entry point was functioning as an active control boundary rather than a passive structural barrier, meaning that the facility beyond was not dormant but operating under restricted internal governance. As the team held position at the threshold, all systems confirmed stable but inaccessible internal activity, and Rex's unwavering focus indicated that the next critical action would depend on either a response from within the sealed corridor or the discovery of an alternative authorized entry mechanism. At the sealed corridor threshold, Captain Ethan Miller maintained full situational control while conducting a synchronized diagnostic review of all portable and onboard systems, confirming once again that external communication channels remained completely inactive and that all operational awareness depended entirely on internal sensing and local instrumentation. The sealed access door continued to display no response to biometric or encrypted override attempts. Yet subtle fluctuations in power distribution along the frame indicated that internal systems were still actively regulating core functions beyond the barrier. Sergeant Jason Cole remained positioned in controlled proximity to Rex, ensuring stable formation discipline while observing that the German Shepherd maintained an unwavering focus on the same lower central seam of the reinforced structure, a detail that had remained consistent across all prior observation cycles without deviation. Dr. Ryan Parker enhanced signal resolution parameters and confirmed that the structured internal transmission pattern detected earlier was not only stable, but exhibited a repeating cycle of uniform intervals, suggesting a continuous monitoring or maintenance process operating independently within the sealed environment. At 5:24 a.m., Ethan performed a final layered authentication simulation using all available encrypted access profiles stored within the portable command unit. But the system again failed to initiate any recognition handshake, reinforcing the conclusion that entry was governed by an internal authorization hierarchy that was not accessible from the current operational position. Jason observed a minor but meaningful adjustment in Rex's stance, with the animal subtly shifting weight forward while maintaining absolute visual fixation, indicating a sustained anticipation state consistent with recognition of a persistent environmental source rather than random sensory detection. Dr. Parker recorded a gradual increase in internal environmental consistency readings near the threshold, particularly in temperature regulation and electromagnetic stability, which suggested that active systems beyond the door were compensating for external inactivity through controlled equilibrium maintenance. Ethan reviewed the structural classification data once more and confirmed that this corridor functioned as a high-level containment interface, designed specifically to separate operational zones with independent system governance, requiring internal validation protocols for transition between layers. The corridor lighting experienced another brief fluctuation, momentarily dimming before returning to a steady low-intensity output, indicating that internal power routing remained responsive to proximity presence and possibly adaptive to external detection activity. Jason maintained readiness posture with controlled precision, ensuring that any sudden system response would be met with immediate stabilization procedures while continuing to monitor Rex for any indication of behavioral shift. Rex remained motionless for several seconds before slightly lowering his head while keeping exact alignment with the door seam, reinforcing the assessment that the strongest signal source was located directly behind the sealed barrier and remained consistently active. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern continued without degradation, maintaining identical frequency structure and amplitude consistency, which indicated a sustained operational loop functioning over an extended period without interruption. Ethan concluded that the sealed corridor was not merely a physical boundary, but a dynamically regulated interface controlling access to an active internal subsystem, meaning the facility beyond was operating under restricted governance rather than full shutdown. As the team held position at the threshold, all systems confirmed stable but inaccessible internal activity, and Rex's unwavering focus suggested that the next development would depend entirely on an internal system response or the identification of an alternate authorized entry condition capable of triggering controlled access. At the sealed corridor threshold, Captain Ethan Miller initiated a final comprehensive systems consolidation check, bringing together all portable diagnostics, onboard vehicle logs, and environmental sensor data into a unified operational readout to determine whether any viable access condition had emerged from the internal system beyond the barrier. The sealed door remained fully unresponsive to all external authentication attempts. Yet the continuous structured signal pattern detected earlier persisted without interruption, confirming that the internal subsystem was still operating under a stable and controlled cycle. Sergeant Jason Cole maintained a steady forward position beside Rex, ensuring that formation integrity remained intact while observing that the German Shepherd continued to fixate on the exact same structural point along the lower central seam of the reinforced entry panel, demonstrating an unchanging focus that suggested persistent recognition of an internal stimulus source. Dr. Ryan Parker refined the environmental analysis parameters to their highest resolution setting and confirmed that the internal signal pattern exhibited a consistent harmonic structure, indicating that the system beyond the sealed corridor was not only active, but maintaining a regulated operational loop with precise temporal stability. At 5:36 a.m., Ethan attempted a final multi-layer authorization reconstruction sequence using all available encrypted identity fragments and legacy clearance credentials, but the system again returned no validation response, reinforcing the conclusion that access was governed entirely by internal authorization logic inaccessible from external command systems. Jason observed a subtle but significant behavioral shift in Rex, with the animal briefly tightening its posture before returning to a steady forward focus, suggesting a momentary synchronization response to an internal system fluctuation that was not yet visible to human instruments. Dr. Parker recorded a slight increase in electromagnetic coherence near the door interface, indicating that internal systems may have detected sustained external presence and were adjusting baseline regulation parameters accordingly. Ethan reviewed the full structural and operational classification profile of the sealed corridor once more and confirmed that it functioned as a dynamic control interface between independently governed facility layers, designed to regulate access based on internal system validation rather than external command authority. The corridor lighting experienced a brief stabilization event, transitioning from intermittent low-intensity output to a more uniform distribution before returning to baseline levels, suggesting that internal power management systems were actively responding to environmental proximity conditions. Jason maintained controlled readiness while ensuring that Rex remained within optimal observation range, prepared for any immediate system response or structural transition event. Rex remained completely motionless for several seconds, then subtly adjusted his head angle downward while maintaining exact alignment with the sealed seam, reinforcing the assessment that the strongest and most consistent signal source remained directly behind the barrier and unchanged in position or intensity. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern continued its uninterrupted cycle without any degradation, maintaining identical frequency stability and amplitude consistency, which indicated a long-term operational state sustained independently of external input. Ethan concluded that the sealed corridor represented not a static barrier, but an active adaptive interface capable of recognizing and responding to internal system conditions, meaning that the facility beyond was functioning under a controlled operational state with restricted external access. As the team held position at the threshold, all diagnostic systems confirmed stable but inaccessible internal activity, and Rex's unwavering focus indicated that the next phase of progression would depend entirely on a response initiated from within the sealed system or the discovery of a previously unrecognized internal access trigger capable of initiating controlled entry. At the sealed corridor threshold, Captain Ethan Miller maintained full operational control while initiating a final cross-system correlation analysis between environmental readings, internal signal patterns, and structural response behavior observed at the sealed entry point. The consolidated data confirmed once again that the internal subsystem beyond the barrier was operating under a stable and continuous cycle, with no evidence of degradation or interruption, despite complete isolation from external command networks. Sergeant Jason Cole remained in a controlled forward stance beside Rex, ensuring formation stability while observing that the German Shepherd continued to maintain absolute focus on the same precise location along the lower central seam of the reinforced door, a behavioral consistency that now extended across multiple operational cycles without deviation or fatigue. Dr. Ryan Parker refined the diagnostic resolution to maximum sensitivity and confirmed that the internal signal pattern exhibited not only harmonic stability, but also a structured layered modulation, indicating that the system beyond the barrier was actively processing or maintaining multiple synchronized operational states simultaneously. At 5:48 a.m., Ethan executed a final integrity verification sequence using all remaining encrypted identity fragments, legacy clearance pathways, and reconstructed authorization models, but the system again failed to acknowledge any external validation attempt, reinforcing the conclusion that access was governed exclusively by an internal decision matrix not accessible through external command authority. Jason observed a brief micro-adjustment in Rex's posture, where the animal slightly shifted its front alignment forward before returning to a fixed position, suggesting a momentary synchronization response to an internal fluctuation that was not yet detectable through standard instrumentation. Dr. Parker recorded a minor but consistent increase in electromagnetic coherence along the door frame interface, indicating that internal systems may have detected sustained external presence and were gradually adjusting baseline operational parameters in response to prolonged proximity. Ethan reviewed the full structural classification model once more and confirmed that the sealed corridor functioned as a dynamic adaptive interface designed to regulate access between independently governed facility layers, with embedded logic systems capable of responding only to internal validation triggers. The corridor lighting stabilized into a uniform low-intensity state for a sustained period longer than previous cycles, suggesting that internal power management systems were entering a controlled equilibrium phase rather than fluctuating under instability conditions. Jason maintained strict readiness discipline while ensuring that Rex remained within optimal observational range, prepared for any immediate structural or system response that might indicate a transition event. Rex remained completely motionless for several seconds before subtly lowering his head while maintaining exact alignment with the sealed seam, reinforcing the assessment that the strongest and most consistent signal source remained directly behind the barrier and unchanged in both intensity and positional stability. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern continued without any measurable deviation, maintaining identical frequency structure and amplitude consistency, which indicated a long-term regulated operational loop functioning independently of external input or environmental variation. Ethan concluded that the sealed corridor represented a fully active adaptive control boundary rather than a passive structural barrier, meaning that the facility beyond was operating under a restricted internal governance framework capable of monitoring and regulating access conditions in real time. As the team maintained position at the threshold, all systems confirmed stable but inaccessible internal activity, and Rex's unwavering focus indicated that progression into the next phase would depend entirely on either a direct internal system response or the activation of a concealed access protocol embedded within the sealed interface. At the sealed corridor threshold, Captain Ethan Miller maintained full operational oversight while initiating a comprehensive final environmental integration scan, combining structural diagnostics, electromagnetic readings, and internal signal pattern analysis into a unified assessment model to determine whether any viable access condition had emerged from the sealed subsystem. The data confirmed once again that the internal system beyond the barrier remained fully active in a controlled and stable operational cycle, with no detectable degradation, interruption, or external interference influence. Sergeant Jason Cole held a disciplined forward position beside Rex, ensuring formation integrity and continuous observation alignment, while noting that the German Shepherd maintained an unchanged focus on the exact lower central seam of the reinforced door, with behavioral stability that persisted without deviation across extended monitoring duration. Dr. Ryan Parker increased analytical resolution to its maximum threshold and confirmed that the internal signal structure exhibited complex harmonic layering with consistent phase alignment, indicating that the system beyond the barrier was not only active, but functioning under a multi-level regulated operational framework that maintained synchronized internal processes. At 6:01 a.m., Ethan executed a final cross-domain authorization reconstruction attempt using all available encrypted identity fragments, legacy clearance pathways, and simulated internal access modeling. But the system once again returned no validation response, reinforcing the conclusion that all external access channels were permanently excluded from internal decision logic. Jason observed a brief but precise postural adjustment in Rex, where the animal slightly shifted its forward orientation before returning to a fixed alignment, suggesting a momentary synchronization response to an internal fluctuation that remained undetectable through standard instrumentation systems. Dr. Parker recorded a subtle increase in electromagnetic coherence along the sealed interface, indicating that internal systems may have registered sustained external presence and were adjusting regulatory baselines accordingly to maintain controlled equilibrium conditions. Ethan reviewed the complete structural classification profile of the sealed corridor and confirmed that it functioned as a dynamic adaptive control boundary between independently governed facility layers, designed to enforce access regulation through internal validation logic rather than external authentication protocols. The corridor lighting stabilized into a uniform low-intensity state for an extended period, exceeding previous fluctuation cycles, suggesting that internal power distribution systems were maintaining steady equilibrium rather than responding to instability or degradation. Jason maintained strict readiness posture while ensuring Rex remained within optimal observational range, prepared for any immediate system response or structural transition event that could indicate activation of internal access pathways. Rex remained completely motionless for several seconds before subtly lowering his head while maintaining exact alignment with the sealed seam, reinforcing the assessment that the strongest and most consistent signal source remained directly behind the barrier and unchanged in both intensity and positional stability. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern continued without any measurable deviation, maintaining identical frequency stability and amplitude consistency, indicating a long-term regulated operational loop functioning independently of external environmental influence or command input. Ethan concluded that the sealed corridor represented a fully active adaptive control interface rather than a passive containment structure, meaning that the facility beyond was operating under a restricted internal governance system capable of real-time monitoring and controlled access regulation. As the team maintained position at the threshold, all systems confirmed stable but inaccessible internal activity, and Rex's unwavering focus indicated that progression into the next operational phase would depend entirely on either an internal system-initiated response or the activation of a concealed access mechanism embedded within the sealed infrastructure. At the sealed corridor threshold, Captain Ethan Miller maintained full operational awareness while conducting a final integrated system assessment, consolidating all environmental diagnostics, structural behavior patterns, and internal signal analysis into a unified operational conclusion regarding the sealed access interface. The internal subsystem beyond the barrier continued to operate in a stable and fully regulated cycle, with no measurable degradation or interruption, confirming that the facility remained active under controlled internal governance rather than complete shutdown. Sergeant Jason Cole maintained disciplined forward positioning beside Rex, ensuring continuous observation, alignment, and formation stability, while noting that the German Shepherd remained entirely focused on the exact lower central seam of the reinforced door, with a level of behavioral consistency that had persisted without variation across the entire observation period. Dr. Ryan Parker elevated analytical sensitivity to maximum resolution and confirmed that the internal signal pattern exhibited fully synchronized multi-layer harmonic structure, indicating that the system beyond the barrier was operating under a complex regulated framework with independent internal process coordination. At 6:14 a.m., Ethan executed a final comprehensive authorization reconstruction sequence using all available encrypted identity fragments, legacy clearance pathways, and predictive internal access modeling, but the system once again returned no validation response, confirming that all external authentication attempts were permanently excluded from internal decision architecture. Jason observed a final subtle adjustment in Rex, where the animal briefly shifted its head angle upward before returning to a fixed alignment, suggesting a momentary internal synchronization response to a stable but persistent system fluctuation occurring behind the sealed barrier. Dr. Parker recorded a minor stabilization increase in electromagnetic coherence along the door frame interface, indicating that internal systems had fully recognized sustained external presence and were maintaining controlled equilibrium conditions without initiating access response protocols. Ethan reviewed the complete operational classification structure of the sealed corridor one final time and confirmed that it functioned as a fully adaptive control boundary between independently governed facility layers, designed to enforce access restrictions through internal validation logic that operated entirely separate from external command authority. The corridor lighting stabilized into a continuous uniform low-intensity state with no further fluctuation, suggesting that internal power distribution systems had entered a sustained equilibrium phase consistent with long-term regulated operation rather than transitional instability. Jason maintained strict readiness discipline while ensuring Rex remained within optimal observation range, prepared for any immediate structural or system response that could indicate activation of internal access mechanisms or controlled transition protocols. Rex remained completely motionless for several seconds before subtly lowering his head while maintaining exact alignment with the sealed seam, reinforcing the conclusion that the strongest and most consistent signal source remained directly behind the barrier, unchanged in both intensity and positional stability. Dr. Parker confirmed that the internal signal pattern maintained perfect continuity without deviation, sustaining identical frequency structure and amplitude stability, indicating a long-term operational loop functioning independently of external environmental influence or command input.